All right, guys, welcome to Financial Fitness Session 6. This is the last session, thankfully for all of you guys. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the home buying process and a few other things, so we'll just dive right in. So it's good to be home. Home is where the heart is. We talk about our homes, and there's all these fancy signs that people buy, home is where the heart is, and, let's make this house a home, those kinds of things. So humans fundamentally understand the difference with the home. The Bible mentions the home and talks about it as a place of shelter and protection. Proverbs 24 comes to mind, but it correlates building a home with wisdom. So in modern Western world, we're one of the cultures that emphasizes people owning a home, and we're actually one of the first cultures, or one of the main cultures, where home ownership has been emphasized and prioritized. It's actually convenient because it's one of the cornerstones of financial prosperity, and possibly even spiritual prosperity. So it's actually, interestingly too, we look at statistics and homeownership has been dropping significantly among the generations. So our grandparents' generation owned more homes outright than we do today. A lot of this has to do with our debt lifestyles. Debt has been pushed more and more. And also one of the big ones is student loan debt. So common millennial issue is student loan debt, which is taking over, which student loan debt, which tends to compete with money people would have traditionally put towards a house. Home ownership's also part of the American dream. And like I said, our parents and grandparents kind of set the tone for achieving this dream. However, if we don't do it right, owning a home can become an American nightmare. So we're going to talk about that. But it can also be a great asset. It appreciates over time and things like that. But we have to do it right. We have to, have our finances in order and approach home buying with the right mentality. Otherwise, it's going to end up being a detriment to us in the long run, or at minimum, a really, really bad struggle. So let's do the baby step review. This is the Dave Ramsey approach. And this is kind of the capstone of the course, so we'll go over these. Baby step number 1, you get $1,000 into an emergency fund. So again, it's not supposed to be a really, really big fund. It's supposed to be a little bit uncomfortable, but enough to cover those life emergencies. Baby step number 2 is we pay off all debt. For most Americans, that takes 18 to 24 months when they get really, really aggressive. For some Americans, it may take a little more, but when we say all debt, we're talking about, James. Okay, never mind. My screen's messing up, but okay, sorry guys. So normally takes 18 to 24 months for most Americans to do that. Baby step number 3, we want to get 3 to 6 months of our expenses and savings. So what we do with that is whatever your monthly debts are, that includes your mortgage and all of your, I'd say, basic living expenses. You should multiply that by at least 3, probably 6. And for some families, as we talked about, that number may be higher. So that was part of your homework. One of the sessions is to think about that and set that number with your spouse or with yourself. Baby step 4, we want to start investing 15% into tax-favored accounts. I'll rewind real quick, guys. When you're doing baby step 3, we can also be saving for our down payment for our house at that stage. So baby step 4, 15% into tax-favored accounts. Now, if you guys remember, I talked about saving or keeping 15% in our budget every month to have a little bit extra for investment accounts. This is why. So in baby step 4, once we have no debt, our income should be a lot more freed up, and we should be able to do that pretty easily. Baby step 5, we want to fund college for our kids if we have kids. Baby step 6, we're going to pay off our home early. And baby step 7, we build more wealth and we give a bunch of it away. So we're going to talk about a lot tonight about baby step number 6, and I'm going to give you guys some analysis, and we're going to do some comparative analysis for is that really a good way to do it? So we're going to look at that. So why do we pay our house off, and how do we do it? So I just mentioned earlier, if we buy a house out of order, we cause a lot of pain. And so actually, a lot of times renting can be a good decision. So let's see. Anybody remember the rule of thumb for renting versus buying? Okay. So the renting versus buying was, a lot of times your break-even point is about 3 to 5 years. So if you're moving somewhere and you're staying fewer than 3 to 5 years, a lot of times renting is going to be your better option. You have to run the numbers though, of course. So, and baby step 4, if you're going to pay down your house early, we're likely taking 15% of our budget and putting that into investing, and then everything above that is going to go pay down your house. That's the Dave Ramsey method. So, the other really important thing to remember is that once you're finished paying off your debts, your standard of living does not increase at that point, okay? If it needs to increase a little bit, okay, we maybe talk about it, but I would recommend do not increase your standard of living at that point. Make sure you're covering your investment accounts, make sure you're getting really healthy pay downs on your house, and then, if you've got a little left over, then that's when we say, okay, maybe. But most of the extra should be going into your house at that point if you're following a Dave Ramsey plan. If you increase your standard of living, what happens? That just means that your payoff time is a lot longer and you're paying down the debt of your house slower. If you go full gazelle on paying down your house, most Americans take between 7 and 9 years to fully pay off their 30-year mortgage once they have no debt. Okay. So why do we buy a house? Well, because owning our home outright can be a huge sense of freedom. I had some people last year in a class that they were at that retirement age and they had just done that. They had paid off their house, they retired, they sold it, and it was a good feeling because they took all that money from that they sold their house for and they moved, and now they have their retirement home and they're enjoying that. It took a huge burden off. When we're in retirement, we don't want to have a mortgage still. Okay, that's extra monthly going out. And if you guys remember, I talked about 95+% of Americans retire with less income than what they had when they were working. So if we're going to have a lower budget, a smaller budget, why not free up 25% of our budget by owning our home outright? Now remember, we still have to pay taxes every year, but that's minuscule compared to a mortgage usually. All right, so that's why we want to own a home. If you're a newlywed, I want to talk about that. We want to wait 1 year. Why do we want to wait 1 year as newlyweds? Well, we need to know a couple things. We need to know that that it's going to be a long-term thing. Obviously, marriage should be for life. We need to also figure out how far away or how close to our mother-in-law we want to live. And it can take about a year to figure that out. So remember, too, we talked about big purchases. We want time before big purchases. Normally, I recommend 24 hours. House is an exception to this, guys. We definitely want more than 24 hours when considering our home buying decision, okay? So you need to be good and ready and financially stable. That's another thing for newlyweds that's often, especially if they're young, right out of college. Maybe there's debt there, maybe there's some other things. You may not be ready to purchase a home and you think you are. So you need to really evaluate that and make sure that you guys are ready. So also, number one reason for divorce, guys, is money. We talked about it before. Adding a house, a brand new house, plus wedding expenses, plus all these other things, adds a huge financial strain, which isn't what we're supposed to be focusing on in our first year of marriage. So if it's going to strain your finances, it's going to really cause you a lot of undue stress. So again, there's a lot of wisdom in this. Highly recommend wait about a year. This also applies for grievous situations. I'll plug that in here. if you are experiencing a lot of grief, or you had a recent loss in the family, or you come into, maybe you had grief and an inheritance, I highly recommend you wait a while, 6 months to a year at least. Make sure you're out of that grief phase before you make a really big financial decision, okay? And if you don't believe me on the grief thing, look at funeral homes and their business models. They tend to upsell a lot of things, and they're taking advantage of a lot of grief. Okay, so last thing is mortgage is a forced savings plan. What do I mean by that? It means we have to put money away each month or we end up homeless, right? So we're forced to save. And, as most people think of house as an investment, it's a forced investment plan almost. The other thing is a house usually tracks with inflation, give or take. It's not always a dollar for dollar, but it usually tracks with inflation. So owning a home acts as a hedge against inflation. So the other thing, that savings that is going into an asset that should be appreciating over time. The other thing is, I should have gone to next slide. But the house is virtually tax-free. So another really cool thing is if you're a single person and your home grows up to $250,000 in value, you get all that profit tax-free. But you have to live in the house for at least 2 years minimum, okay? And if you're a married couple, you're allowed to make up to $500,000 on that home sale tax-free. So it's a pretty good perk that the government doesn't punish us for buying and selling homes. You'll get taxed if you're a home flipper, though, so you have to live in it 2 years. So investing versus home payoff. So here's where we want to analyze this decision. Should we pay off our house early? Is Dave Ramsey full of steam? Or somewhere in between. And I'm going to give you guys this comparative analysis because we may not fully agree with Dave Ramsey, or I may not, but he's on to, it can be pretty good. It's about managing our risk. And so we're going to see that risk can lead to, if we have something very, very low risk, we might lose some money, but the alternative would be really high risk, and maybe we made a lot of money, or maybe we ended up losing some money. So the risk is usually commensurate with the payout. So here's our scenario. Assume we purchase a house for $200,000 at 4% interest rate in a 30-year fixed. We put the 20% down, which is $40,000, and our monthly house payment then is going to be $1,050. So let's assume we have $4,000 a month take-home pay, and we're only able to have $1,000 left over after bills and expenses for investing or paying down debt. Okay? Which that's 25%. So I may be being, cheating a little, but I'm showing you we need a little more money to play with in this example because it's gonna demonstrate the point. What is the best use of the $1,000 in this scenario? So we have $1,000 extra in our budget. What is the absolute best way or best application for that $1,000? What do you guys think? Sorry to put you on the spot. So should we pay down our house? Should we invest more? Or should we go buy the brand new pink Jedi Snuggie that is out? Investing. Okay, so we have an investor in the house. Dave Ramsey would say, pay down our house aggressively because debt is evil. We got to get rid of it. So we're going to look at both. All right, so there's a lot on this slide. Let me try to unpack it. So on the left, we've got 15% invested. So that would be 15% of your total income. And then so that's $600 in this case. And $400 a month we're going to pay down onto the home. So we're putting a little extra in our home, but we're still investing. So we're making everybody happy here. At 7% interest, we would get about $856,000. At 12%, we'd end up with $2.1 million with just $600 a month invested. Our home would end up costing a total of $254,300 after fees and interest. And so we want to analyze the opportunity cost. We'll get to that in a minute. The next one, we do 0% investing, absolutely nothing. We say we're going to go full gazelle on our house. We put $0 a month into investing, $1,000 a month on our home. At 7% interest, we should still have other investing though. Where am I getting that? Forget that for now. And 12%, we'd get 1.1. Our home payoff would be in 9.08 years. And the home cost would be about $230,000. So we're saving $25,000 in interest doing that. I think what I might have done is I'm looking at a 30-year period and I'm looking at what extra per month you would have. And so anyway, we'll get into that. 100% invested, so the right one. We do what Evan said, and we put all the money into the investment basket, let it ride on Wall Street, forget our house. We'll just pay that as normal over 30 years. We might get $1.21 million or $3.2 million, depending on the interest rate. And our home payoff will take 30 years. So notice in option B, our home payoff took about 9 years. In option A, our home payoff was about 15 years, which is really close to that 15-year fixed I was talking about a couple sessions ago. So now we need to look at the opportunity cost, okay? This creeps in, I promised you guys, every single session. So our best case scenario for investment was a couple $1 million. So if we look over at the 7%, we'd say, well, we'd lose $353,000 in option A by doing that. But we get $61,000 in savings, probably on our mortgage total. And we gain about $180,000, because don't forget, guys, we're getting $1,000 per month freed up in our budget for 15 out of the 30 years. So we have to account for that. Okay, number 2, our opportunity cost. We're going to lose about $630,000 at 7%, but we will gain about $84,000 in interest savings and $252,000 in our budgets from the extra 21 years of income. I have a typo down there. It's 21 years times $1,000, I think. So actually, and the math doesn't work right, so I'm not sure why I went with the 252. Again, I apologize. Didn't review this a lot, but these numbers are close, and there's a reason why I put them on here. So I just didn't review the scenario before today. So anyway, we're going to end up gaining pretty close to $250,000. Then in the final case, we lose the $1,000 a month over the 30-year period, or over the 15 to 21-year period, and we'll gain about $634,000 in investments. So you guys have to decide what's best. The one on the right, if we go full investing, is probably more risky. It is the most risky option. The one in the middle is the least risky option, and the one on the left is in between. And I would generally recommend the one on the left. Do a little bit in investing, do a little bit in your house. So we saw the comparison, but we did free up that $1,000 a month. Now let's say we roll that into an investment account. Let's see if it gets a lot closer. So again, one of my numbers on this slide was off. It's the 21 years is, I think, about correct, but the 15 years should only be about 7%, should only read about $500,000, 600,000, somewhere in there. And the 12% interest should read about $1 million, I believe. So they obviously wouldn't be equal. So that's a typo. So 15 years at $2,000 a month, because remember, we get an extra $1,000 a month, and now we need to roll that into investment. So you're going to see in option 2, we'd have the 21 years to lump that $2,000. And option C, we wouldn't have any years with extra. We would just have our base $1,000 a month that we're investing. So you can see the numbers are the same in option 3 at $1.21 and $3.2 million. But in option B, our account comes closer at 7% at 1.1, and even at 12%, we get $2.5 million. So paying off our house really quickly with investing a lot heavily after that for 21 more years helps us to catch up almost as if we hadn't paid our house off early. And in 15 years, so if we just do the 15-year plan, we're going to end up with at least $1 million in the account. So you can see it might actually be best and most risk averse, at least early on, to pay off our house really, really aggressively. So we have to figure out what works for us and what we want to do. But the 21 years payoff, or paying off your house in 9 years, can give you a lot of peace of mind, and it can open you up for a lot of other investment opportunities in the next 20 years after that. All right. So home shopping. There's 3 things that can create value. I would ask the audience, but we all know what the answer is. It's location, location, location. Okay? Those are the 3 things, guys. We need to know where we're going to buy. We want to look at the price in the neighborhood. These are just some buying tips that I'm going to go through kind of quickly. We don't want to overbuy in a neighborhood. So if we buy the most expensive house, a $400,000 house in a $300,000 neighborhood, we're wrong. We also don't want to improve the house so much that we are eclipsing the neighborhood. So you don't buy the fixer-upper and then make it the $500,000 house in the $300,000 neighborhood. So you got to be careful about being kind of the best in the neighborhood. So it can make it a little harder to sell, and it'll be harder because how realtors value your house is they go and they look at what are called comps, which just mean comparative homes, and they look at what other homes in your neighborhood sold for. So that's why. If we set, back to my location thing, if we set a mobile home on an empty field in Kansas next to an outhouse, it might be worth $3,000. But if I put it on a 1-acre plot on Malibu Beach, it becomes worth $3 million. So location does matter. Better views also help you out a little bit. Better views sell better. So another thing, when we're looking through the house, we want to overlook things that can be easily replaced. I can't tell you how many times I've watched these stupid house hunter shows or something like that. I'm not even kidding. House Hunters International. Oh, this one doesn't have a toilet. It had a different, the sit down. Well, we just can't buy it. Well, everything else in the house was great. Spend $1,000 and replace the toilet, right? Budget for it and just replace it. Especially if you're getting a good deal on the rest of the house. Or here's another one. Oh, honey, I just can't. That wallpaper's hideous, and they used a dark green paint in the bathroom, and that's just gross. Oh, and there's carpet in the bathroom? Ugh. If that doesn't make you crawl, I don't know. So, but the point is we look at those things and we go, those are all really cheap, relatively cheap fixes, and they're fairly easy to fix. So the question is, why would we not buy the house? We can use that for our negotiating, right? If we're at the car lot and we're like, oh, it's got a scratch over here. Oh, those rims aren't really the ones I wanted. You can use some of the bad things on the car to negotiate down. We can do the same with the house. We use some of the bad things to negotiate down. But in 9 times out of 10, that negotiation down is going to be disproportionate in your favor if you just replace the carpet and the paint yourself. So keep those things in mind. You need to be able to look past some of the things. Now, I'm going to jump into a story on that. It's a good time. Must pass inspections. So what I'm going to talk about is we want to look past some things, but we don't want to do it so much that it's our detriment to do so. A really good example is I know somebody that was a home buyer, and they went in and they said, oh, I can look past the stuff. The house had some great bones in it. It had a really nice basement. It wasn't fully finished, but we'll finish it. The carpet's a little dated, but it's okay. But it had really nice, it was a 3-story with the basement included, and it was a cute little house, and the price was right on it. It was a for sale by owner, though, and the buyer did not get an inspector, an independent third-party inspector. Bought the house, signed all the paperwork, no inspection, okay? Not a very wise decision. Turns out the electrical was bad. It had flooding problems. Some of the other water, it had other water issues, and it wasn't just a cute little house. Compound that with the fact that the person that bought it and said, oh, I'll fix it up. I'll do some tile work. I'll do some carpet work. I'll do whatever. That person had no expertise to do those things themselves, and they had no excess capital to go pay for those repairs. So they bought the house, they were stretched thin, and they had no money to ever do the improvements. So they ended up with a house that actually cost them a lot of money that they couldn't even sell in the long run. So these are all things we want to keep in mind. Number one thing, get a third-party independent inspector. Any home seller, if you want to negotiate that as part of your term, should not care that you're getting an extra inspector, okay? All right, we want good street view and a good floor plan. These kinds of things are a bit intuitive, and they're actually a little bit subjective. But if you're in a non-subdivision plot, you want to always get a land survey. This is also important. It's going to help you. Like out here, you need to know if there's an arroyo under you. Okay, so you need to know some things about the land that you're going to build on or that's under you. So land survey can help you. Okay, you can challenge appraisals. Here's the great thing, guys. I get notes from the government every year that tell me what my house is worth. Okay, some years, they like to tell me my house is worth a whole lot more than I think I could sell it for because they have a vested interest in taxing me on a % of what they say that's worth. So this is why we challenge appraisals. Believe it or not, guys, this is actually a neat tip for you. You can go down, I believe it's to the clerk's office, but there are ways to challenge an appraisal every year for tax purposes. So if you submit a challenge every year, a lot of times you can get your home value lowered a little bit and you'll be taxed a little less. Just be a little wary that on file, those appraisals may show up, those lower appraisals, so when it rolls around time to sell, your home may come in near the bottom of the market or something. So just remember there's a little give and take there. But we can challenge appraisals, and we can get a third party. So when we sell our house, we might want to get a third party appraisal. Could be to our benefit. All right, realtor question. Let me check something real quick. All right. So the realtor question is, should we even bother with a realtor? Dave Ramsey does recommend getting a realtor. They do add some value. To me, they're a lot like a car salesman in modern era where we have Carvana or, frankly, Craigslist and other things. We can find cars online with a click of a button. We can, if it's a trusted thing like Carvana or CarMax or something that have had trusted certified mechanics, it's a certified used car. Why don't I buy it online and click? Why do I go to a physical lot? So that's philosophy for another day. But it's similar with realtors. We do a lot of our shopping online, but realtors do connect you with the money, the broker, the bank. They do connect you with other sellers. They have a system called the Multiple Listing Service or the MLS that really gets a lot of promotion out for your house, and it lets other realtors know, hey, this house is going on market. So the MLS can get your home a lot of exposure, a whole lot more than a for sale by owner sign out in your front yard. But it's 2021. We don't just do that anymore either by owner. So just keep in mind, realtors will typically take about a 6% commission on the sale of your house, which is pretty significant. And the seller virtually always pays that whole commission. And there's one thing I want to mention here too. There was a really credible study done by the University of Wisconsin, and they looked at rural, city, all kinds of different real estate, and they found that in 98% of, in this case, that study, it was 89% of buyers shopped on the internet before they bought their house. So they looked online, they saw their house, and they bought it before they looked at it. There was actually another study in Wisconsin that also found that a realtor, that's what it is, that a realtor had no impact on sale price. So one of the biggest lies a realtor will always tell you is, if you sell with us, we'll get you top dollar, okay? Not necessarily true, and according to that study, it wasn't true at all. I linked that to a realtor friend of mine one time, and I got unfriended. So, Example, so here's the title insurance. So home title insurance helps you. You guys have probably heard about it on some of the radio ads lately. I've heard them. But home title insurance is good because it protects any question at all about an unclean title. Okay? It's especially important if there is an estate or a inheritance and it was getting split. There's a story here about the three heirs. And what happened is two of them, brother and sister, they signed off on the house and they owned it for a few years, or they had sold it. And I think they either just owned it for a few years and were renting or something. But either way, after a few years, the third brother comes. He comes out of the woodwork and he starts demanding the estate. Well, it's a little bit past when they were divvying that up and dealing with that. That's where the insurance comes in and covers it. Okay? And then I think some of the other home title insurance things that can get covered are things like title theft, things like that. So if somebody uses your title to take a loan or something, I believe the title insurance will cover those too. So check your policies, see what there is, see what they read, but usually it'll cover you on anything with your house. And remember, we need a shield for our home. It's one of our biggest assets. If you made me erase today everything I'd paid on my house and start again, I wouldn't be very happy. Okay, so we talked about earlier the right way. How do we do it the right way? So I see all these people around, and I hear it. I hear it at church. I hear it at the store. You hear this everywhere. You look at people, or people look around and they start saying, "Oh, well, we want to start a family," and then that's usually followed with, "Well, we can't start a family in this 800 square foot apartment." So the problem is these people are confusing a want versus a need. So again, remember guys, timing matters and we want to be financially smart. Okay? Your newborn baby doesn't need a house. Okay? They're just as happy sleeping in a crib in the living room or the kitchen by the dishwasher or your closet. Okay? Please don't call CPS on me. But your baby does not need their own bedroom. Even your children, I was going to say ask, my wife is Mexican, so ask her family if Mexican children need their own bedroom, okay? They don't. They often share for many years, even into late teenager. So it can be a point of contention or growth for siblings. I don't know, I'll let you parents decide. But point is, we cannot confuse want versus need. And we need to do what's right for us financially, okay? 20% down, that's really, 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 really non-negotiable as much as possible, okay? I really don't like to ever recommend anyone buy a house without 20% down, and I'm going to prove that to you with the numbers. Our numbers earlier showed us that financially, the 15-year fix can be a pretty good balance for us, okay? So that just reiterates, a 15-year fixed rate's not bad. And again, I'll reiterate, guys, if you do a 30-year, try to pay it at the 15-year fixed price, and that gives you the flexibility for the cushion if you have to lower your payments for some reason. But be disciplined with that if you're going to do that. All right, what about 100% down payment? Isn't that the best? Well, a Dave Ramsey would say yes, probably. An opportunity cost person might go, well, I could invest that same money and do a lot better. So, for example, if I were to take a $200,000 house and say, well, I've got $200,000 cash right now, I'm just going to go buy a house. Well, if I put that in the stock market at 30 years, I'll probably end up with about $6 million versus if I just put $40K down, I'd probably only have about $1 million or so. And assume I didn't invest the rest, I guess. So, would it be, that's 30 years times double. Yeah. So, anyway, the 160, I think I'd have to look at the growth on 30 years, but I think it's around, no, it'd be higher than that. Anyway, you're going to do better putting 200 into your retirement fund or your investing account than putting it on a house probably. But 200% down, why not? So either way, point is, guys, most Americans, we can't do that. We aren't wealthy enough to just go drop and write a check for an entire house. Most of us aren't. Okay? So 20% down's the minimum of what I'm going to ever recommend. So mortgage does not exceed 25% of net monthly pay. We've said that quite a few times. We want to be careful, we want to be cautious, we want to be coherent, we want to have a good plan, and we want to apply good financial principles, and we want to weigh everything heavily when purchasing a home. We want to try to look at the outcomes. Again, we're going to use the things we've learned here about opportunity cost, return on investment. Those are things we're going to apply to help us make that decision better. If you have no credit score, you'll need manual underwriting for a mortgage, okay? You can find manual underwriters that'll do a mortgage. I'll just leave it at that. So our home is our biggest asset, and so we want to make sure that we make it count. Here are some of the home buying traps. These are the problems with things that will, everyone has an agenda. So these are some of the things that are gonna make a home cost you a lot more. Adjustable rate mortgage, we talked about that a little bit. We're gonna talk about each one of these in their own slide. Interest-only loans, reverse mortgages, accelerated biweekly payoff programs, private mortgage insurance or PMI, FHA loans, VA loans, owner financing loans, and supplemental loans. So the adjustable rate mortgage, the problem is the interest rate can adjust. And when the interest rate adjusts on us, that changes what our monthly is. If you guys also remember, I talked about you're paying an exorbitant amount of interest in your first 5, 10, 15 years of that mortgage if you're on a 30-year mortgage. But your first 5 years, you're paying a lot of interest. One percentage point could mean the difference of hundreds of dollars for you. So we want our house to be at a nice, steady 25% or less of our net income. We don't want that adjusting, okay? It makes it difficult to set a monthly budget. They also usually will offer really, really low rates, and then they'll up them on you, okay? They'll get you in the door with the low rate, and then they'll up it. So again, we want fixed rate here. Consistency's better. Even if we lose a little bit of money in the long run, this consistency, to me, is worth a lot more. Interest-only loans. So you pay only the interest, all right? I was looking at some credit card debt recently, and a family had a fairly big amount and a 19% interest rate, and just paying the interest rate alone would have been hundreds of dollars a month. That means that they would go their whole life paying just that couple hundred a month. I think it was like $500 a month or so. But you would go your whole life paying, let's say, $500 a month for 30, 40, 50 years until you die, and you would never have paid off 1 cent of the debt that you actually took. That's crazy. That's what an interest-only loan is for your house. You're only paying the interest. You never get equity. You never own a dime of what that house is worth. Now, the only plus of an interest-only loan that the venture capitalist would say is, well, if my house doubles in price or goes up and becomes a $200,000 house becomes a $500,000 house, I can still sell it and pocket the $300K. But you're still losing everything you were paying every month. These are high risk and you're not getting any equity. I don't recommend. So we never make payment on the principal, we never generate the equity, and we'll never own our home. Reverse mortgage. So what this does is it gives you a loan against the equity of your house. So let's say that I'm the standard American family and I've been paying on my house for 15 years, and now I've paid it down to where I've got about $100,000 in an actual equity in my house from the purchase price or something. What they'll do is the bank or whoever's selling you this, they'll come to you and they'll say, well, we'll give you $100,000 cash right now, but we're going to basically get the title to your house again until you start paying that off. So they'll give you the money, but the problem is, and they might even give you a better rate on it, but the problem is you now will no longer own your house and you usually get hit with a higher interest and hidden fees on it. So we work really hard to pay down our house and work way too hard, I think, to just give it away. So I don't recommend reverse mortgages. The only time you might do something like this is if you are elderly, single, maybe if your house is paid off and you want to not leave any assets to anybody else. It's kind of the same in the same camp as an annuity. So we don't generally recommend annuities, but if you're single and don't care about inheritance, perhaps, maybe, and that's the only case. Accelerated biweekly payoff programs. So basically, would you pay someone to take your money and deposit in the bank? So I'll pay you $5 to go take this check and take it to the bank. That's silly, right? So a lot of times they're just charging you to pay off your house a little faster. You can do that yourself. You can just make the extra payments, okay? Oh, this is another one I get. But Josh, if I pay off my house too fast, then I'm not going to get that credit that I get, that tax credit I get every year for paying all that interest. Okay, anyone out there ever have their wife come home and say, honey, I saved us $250 today. You guys know what that means, though. You say, okay, the next question, how much did you actually spend? Oh, about $1,200, but I saved us a lot. It's a similar concept there. You're paying off your house quickly, and your insurance or your interest payment, a $200,000 loan at about 5% is $10,000, right? So that's $10,000 in your first year that you're paying in interest. What would I rather have, the tax credit or the tax write-off of the $10,000, which may equate to a few thousand on my paycheck? Or would I rather just not pay that interest at all? So it's one of those things. You're changing the color of money, and it's probably way better to just not pay the interest. It is way better to not pay the interest. PMI, this is one of my favorites. I've talked about this a lot. If you do not put that 20% down payment on your house, you will end up owing the bank PMI. This is insurance against you basically not having a down payment. The way it works, or was supposed to originally work, is you put this money down, and over until you have that 20% down payment in equity in the house, you pay for this insurance. So if you default, you owe, this covers the bank for that amount. It's basically like insurance for the first 20% for your down payment. There's one problem with this. First off, it normally takes 7 to 11 years of paying to get that much equity. Remember, guys, we're spinning our wheels those first couple years because the interest payments are a significant percentage of our mortgage. The next one is some companies now actually will require you to do PMI for longer, even up to maybe even the whole term. I have heard of that. I haven't researched it a ton. But anyway, even at 7 to 11 years, it's dangerous. It costs us a lot of extra money, and we're going to look at the numbers. Many of them have mandatory time limits now, too. That's another big one that they threw in a lot of modern loans. So even if I am super gung-ho and aggressive about paying down my mortgage, they're going to still say, well, yeah, you have 30% equity right now, but you're signed up for 7 years for that payment no matter what. So you have to pay that, and it's a flat fee, so it's not percentage. So you'll just pay that $150 a month for 7 years no matter what you do. A lot of them are like that now. So if you're going to end up with PMI, check the reading. And I recommend avoiding it. It also lures people into 0% down mortgage situations. See, there's this other thing, guys. Again, brokers, realtors, these people, they make money off of you, off of your commissions. Okay? They want you buying and selling houses. They don't care if after the fact you can't pay for it. Banks do to a degree, and they care more now because in 2008, that was part of the problem. They didn't care as much. But it's still really important to keep that in mind. 0% down is a trap. It's a huge trap. 20% down will avoid your PMI. Okay. So let's look at the case study. A friend of mine was trying to convince me he wanted to buy a $160,000 home. He didn't want to put any money down. And he was trying to convince me that paying PMI was the best financial decision rather than just renting an apartment at $1,000 a month. Well, was he correct? What do you think, Caleb? No, was not correct. PMI is going to cost you more. So I used a 4.25% interest for these calculations, and this discussion was in 2019. So that's why my interest rates are a tad higher than today. So what I'm going to say about realtors, and I know I've beat that one a little bit, guys, but they'll say phrases like, oh, buy today. You don't need that much or even anything down. with low interest, I saw this one just a couple months ago, within 2 months of now. With low interest, look at these historically low interest rates, you can buy more house. Your money goes further, right? So they're always trying to get you to spend the most amount. Quit throwing money away on rent and get some equity, right? These are always things. That's a half truth, okay? Because sure, you're getting equity, but remember we talked about those break-even points and why those are important for renting versus buying. So they do have an interest in the sale. All right, so in this PMI case, I did a PMI, just a mortgage calculator here. Note that in this example, only $220 a month is going to our principal, that's our equity, and $567 a month is just going into interest. And then your PMI was $173 a month. You've got your tax, your homeowner's insurance, and your HOA. Quick comment on HOAs, guys. Try to avoid them. They're the gift that keeps on giving and never goes away. And if you can't avoid the HOA, then at least go somewhere where it's really, really reasonable and it's not just killing you. I've seen some that are hundreds a month, and it's unless you're getting a lot for it, it's not usually worth it. Sometimes you just can't avoid it, but keep an eye on HOA fees, okay? That's a question you always want to ask when you go somewhere and look at a house. Is there an HOA? How much is it? All right. So if I put 20% down, this is what that same house, that same budget, that same interest would have looked like. $176 on my principal every month and only $453. Those are obviously lower because the total price of the house is only 80% of the sale price, not the full. And I have no PMI, and you can see my payment's about $750 a month versus about $1,100 a month. Okay, so this was the next one. 1 sec. Yeah, all right. So this is what I did is I graphed the data. So, my right axis cut off. Okay, anyway, my right axis had a label, and it was the interest amount paid in dollars. So it's not the same as the left. You're not paying $120,000 in interest, but you are paying about $90,000, I think, over a 30-year loan. Maybe 70 to 90. It might even be up to 120 actually. So it's pretty close on scale, I guess. Anyway, so on the left axis, that's the principal amount that you owed, and you see obviously as we go to 30 years, we pay that down. And eventually it gets to zero. And on the left, we start at no interest paid, and then that's how much we've paid over the years. The important part of this this graph is that the difference at the end of the day, if I do PMI versus no PMI, 0% down versus 20% down, the difference at the end of when I own that house outright after 30 years, if I did nothing different, is $47,500, give or take. So it's almost a $50,000 decision to put zero down today. Okay? So my friend was not correct about the numbers. And I'll also mention, guys, I was pretty conservative in these estimates. It's probably more than that. I was very conservative for him. All right, FHA and VA loans. They'll give you really low down payments, maybe as low as 3%. They're trying to lure first-time home buyers. And again, guys, when we're young, we're a little bit more financially vulnerable. People tend to know that. Additional fees usually apply, and sometimes even PMI applies. And a conventional loan is usually better. I'll say it's almost always better. And when I say better, I mean cheaper. Better for you. And you just saw the example of what compounding interest and fees can do to you. Even if I took out, because you have to understand in those graphs, that was also interest compounding as well. And you saw that in the interest. And you have the monthly fee that's eating you up too. And in that example, guys, the PMI was about $23,000 total until they had 20% down. All right, VA loans. These are for our men and women in the armed forces. We want to thank their service by giving them a 0% down option. Well, we've just gone over that's really dangerous, and it usually costs you more money. But what's neat is they might get out of PMI even. Some VA loans, you don't pay PMI. Well, that's nice, but they do have a funding fee on them. that normally hits you pretty hard, so it can be kind of a high initial price or a higher initial price, way less than a down payment though, to be honest. But that's money you don't get back. That's just money that's a fee now. Remember, fees are not equity. And a conventional is usually still better because of the way that interest is compounding against you. It's usually cheaper to still go conventional. The exception here is if you are a military personnel and you want to get a VA loan, you can get in with the lowest cost and pay that house down very, very aggressively. And if you do that, this will actually beat a conventional loan. But you're basically slapping 20% down anyway into a VA structure. So take that for what it's worth. But if you do it that way, you may come out ahead. Owner financing loan. This is really cool. This is me saying I'm going to sell my house, but you know what? Don't use banks. You just pay me the payments. Well, it can get really hairy. You have to write everything down. I personally would not sell a home that way. I would not. But you can find some deals buying that way. Usually it's a motivated seller who's doing that kind of thing, and it's usually in a down market or they need to sell quickly. Currently, that's not an issue. Houses are flying off the market. So usually with this kind of deal, you can add your own sweat equity, you can get a graduated interest rate, you can do some things that'll favor you in the long run on this, and you need a contract. I'd still probably do conventional, but if you found just a great deal, then okay. But I wanted to point out owner financed. Supplemental loans, this is another trap. Lures you away from that 20% down. You guys are probably noticing a theme here. And often there's high variable rates on the 10 or 20% of the supplemental amount. So the way this works is you go to the bank and you say, well, I don't have any money to put down, and it's illegal for me to buy a house without 20% down unless I have this PMI or this other. So what I want you to do is I want you to loan me the 20% down that I put on the house, and then loan me the 80% for the house, and I'll put this in one pot as a conventional loan, and then I'll take that 20%, and it's basically like a personal loan that I'm just going to pay back to you. Well, the problem is it's usually a very high rate for that 20%, and it's usually a variable loan, which we just talked about, why those are so bad. So 80-10-10 is similar, except I have 10% money to put in the pot, and I only borrow 10% from the bank for my personal loan and 80% for the conventional part. So those are both things to keep in mind. Should I refinance? I get this question. Refinancing for any interest amount under than 1% as a rule of thumb is not worth doing. It's usually not worth the fees. It's not worth the savings. It's usually not worth it. Also, a thing that the world will usually throw at us when we say refinance is you can lower your payments. Well, that's the same thing as saying you can buy more house with a low interest payment. It's kind of the same thing. Not for us. We will not lower our payments. We're going to keep unless our budget is desperate or something. But we're not usually refinancing because our budget's desperate. We're refinancing because we want to save some money. Okay? And to save money, it has to be usually 1% or more. And we want to keep paying what we're paying because we were already budgeting that, right? So don't make the change. You'll just pay your house off a little faster. Even if you're in this other debt snowball stage and other things, unless your debt's a lot higher, then you have to look at it case by case. But I try to keep the rate the same. I'd recommend you keep it the same because you're just it's working on your house a little bit faster. And we never want to take debt to refinance. Let's say they charge you a $10,000 fee to refinance, and you're like, yeah, but I'm going to save $40,000 over the life of the loan. Well, but taking $10,000 of personal debt now is probably going to end up hurting you a lot now. It could hurt your ability to compound and invest and do other things with that money. It's not as good of a deal for you then. So we don't want to take debt to finance or refinance. All right. So the 2008 housing crash. What I'm going to mention here, do I have time? I think I have time. I talked about it a little bit in, I think, session 3 or 4. But the issue here was that banks were overextending to buyers. There was actually, and not political, I believe, I'll just say, it was a 1990s era, I believe, bill. And it was signed, and it was something like Housing Affordability Act or something. And it made it so that you could poorer families could buy houses, even if banks traditionally wouldn't have loaned to them because they would have deemed them a financial risk. So it removed a lot of the regulation that banks had to respect people's income. And so what happened is banks were loaning to a lot of people who couldn't afford their homes. There were also issues with chaining houses that I talked about, using equity from one to get another, and then they built this whole house of cards, and when housing prices crashed, it all collapses on them. So there were a couple issues there, but a lot of people owned houses that they couldn't afford. And if you have throw in a recession with that, people have a hard time paying their mortgage. Well, now throw in foreclosures. And what happens with massive foreclosures? Supply and demand, lots of houses on the market. Well, that causes prices usually to drop. Well, now, when houses start crashing in value a lot, some people actually feel like they have to sell to get out. Anyway, people panic, they tend to sell, probably when they shouldn't. So what I'm going to note here, guys, is just like with stocks, we don't lose money until we sell the asset that we're holding. Okay, I'll say that again. You do not lose money until you sell the asset you're holding. That 1984 Mustang that we keep talking about, that's awesome, might only be worth $8,000 today, but I only lose the money, the difference of what I bought it for and what I'm selling it for, if I sell it today. If I hold it for another 20 years and I know that I'm going to be a rock star and get 50 grand for it in 20 years, well, then I'm going to hold it, okay? So we want to try to find the right time to sell. So a housing crash is not usually the right time to sell. It's a good time to rent. So we'll talk about that. But in economic panics, we want to hold the asset and not sell. And once the market recovers, then we can sell if we don't want to continue renting. So if you're upside down on a house, what do we do? Well, there's foreclosures. Basically, the bank comes and they'll sell the home. And then they just sue you for the difference. There's a short sale, which is basically a foreclosure. And there's strategic default is what people call this. Basically, they just walk away from the home because it isn't worth what they owe. And I think that that's wrong. I think if you commit to paying a debt, you pay the debt. And frankly, in the housing market, guys, we can find ups and downs. If we're patient, we can usually make it work. So I believe strategic default to be ethically incorrect. Okay, selling. All right, so what are some of the problems here? We talked about upgrading our house. Your wife wants to redo the kitchen again for the third time in 5 years. Might not be worth the ROI, okay? So think about it. What does it cost us to do these upgrades? Will it add value to the house? Certain things like master bedroom usually do great. Things like the kids' bathroom, not as much. So you have to know, you kind of have to know the things about the house that are going to sell and what are going to improve the value. Curb appeal is really good. A little bit of landscaping goes a long way. Staging is really important. This is one of the values that realtors usually bring, is they'll help stage your house. And then small improvements can have big impact on selling price and time. So you don't want people to walk through and see some cracked walls or some chipping paint. Again, this is the same reason as we negotiate the price down and we just fix the carpet ourselves. It doesn't cost you that much to put in the hardwood or to replace the carpet or to repaint the rooms. And a fresh coat of paint looks really good, usually. And it will add a lot of value for people that are just casually looking through and can't see past defects or things. So those are things that will help you get a little more. All right, so baby step 7 is the peace part, okay? Dave Ramsey calls his program the Financial Peace University. Peace is tranquility, or, tranquility. Why do we want this peace? Well, when we're not worrying about our bills, that's a lot of stress. Money is a huge stressor. If we're not worried about it because we're smart with our budgeting, smart with our investing, and we've gone this journey and come out ahead, we're going to be so much more content, happy, and less stressed, okay? Proverbs 13:22 says, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. That would be your grandkids. That means it has to funnel through your kids first, okay? We want to build enough that we actually have, that's what they call generational wealth, I think is the hot term right now for that. but you want enough that your kids can, and hopefully you train them up with money too, but that they could manage your assets and do well, and then that a lot of what you left is going to go on to even your grandkids. Or you leave so much that even your kids could squander some and your grandkids would still. So that's what Proverbs is telling us. Romans 13:8 says, let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another, for whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. So it's a love your neighbor and a don't have debt outstanding. He's talking about financial debt here, Paul is. Okay, in 1 Timothy 6:10 says, for the love of money is the root of all evil, for while some have coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. So again, loving money, bad thing. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about getting that financial peace. We're at the end of the tunnel. You also need to remember where this money came from. We're all just asset managers for God, guys, okay? Don't ever start loving money. That's where 1 Timothy comes in. And I will say tithe means 10%, okay? Prayerfully consider your tithe. One of the common myths that, and I'm going to try not to get myself in trouble much with the tithe, but one of the common myths is that the church needs your money. Well, the church might need your money. God does not need your money, okay? What the church really needs from us, guys, is all-in believers, Christian leadership, people that have a desire to serve their community, and integrity. And an outward focus on evangelism rather than an inward focus on, wealth or other things. So that's really what the church needs from us. And so that's just something I wanted to point out and make, really clear. So why do we bother tithing? Well, there's some redemption built into it, and that's really important. God wants us to become just a little bit more like him. Every time we give, we understand that we're not the owner, that we're the asset manager. One way I like to think about it is God gives us 100% of what we have, and he's asking for 10. Okay, so we're moving closer and closer. And again, guys, I don't think he so much cares about the 10% or the 80% or whatever you're giving. I think it's a matter of submission, and it's a matter of we're moving closer and closer to selflessness when we understand that it's not ours. Okay, it's for our own good, not for his benefit. He'll find ways to accomplish his will with or without us. And also we get less preoccupied with ourselves and more focused on others, which is, the second commandment. So it's really important. All right. So we've talked a lot about the budget sheets. We've talked a lot about financial security. And I do want to take just some time in the class to talk a little bit about eternal security. And I want to talk about how do we get that? What is eternal security? I said most religious people, they will talk about works, like a budget sheet, right? How do we get to heaven? Well, I gave to the poor. That's 1,000 heaven points. You hear a little chime somewhere in heaven every time someone gives to the poor. So this guy has a higher score. Oh, well, I lied to my mom, so that's minus 250 points. Well, but I gave that beggar $5, so that's at least 5 heaven points. So, it's this give and take that they think. If I do enough good things, I can get to heaven. The truth of the matter is, we are not adequate. We cannot stand in front of a holy, just, or righteous God. We can't. There is nothing we can do to achieve that, to achieve heaven, to be good enough, okay? Imagine we end up with our financial journey here and we have $5 million in the bank and we're bragging to all of our friends about how good we did. Hey, that's awesome. Now go try bragging to Elon Musk, right? How inadequate do we feel trying to do that? It's the same but even worse when we're trying to say, look at our good works to God, okay? So there is absolutely no amount of good we can do. Knowing this is why God sent his son Jesus to die for our sins and for our numerous inadequacies, okay? So God is looking at it like a budget sheet, and not only does he cancel out all of our red, he's giving us everything. He's giving us abundant, okay? It'd be like Elon Musk not only paying off your debt, but then giving you every penny he owns and becoming your house cleaner for the rest of his life. It's phenomenal. We're overflowed. So that singular acts give us the abundance and the overflowing. And so anyway, just remember too, guys, no matter what, God will bless us with abundance. It's not always financially, but it is in joy, hope, and trust in the promise that he's sent his son to die for us. So if anything I just said is confusing to you or that you don't understand and you want to learn more or you need to pray or talk to somebody, I mean, seriously, reach out. I will gladly talk to you. And I mean that from the bottom of my analytical heart. So, and what I just told you in the last minute is more important, incalculably more important than anything I would have taught you in this past 6 weeks. Okay? All right. So I really appreciate everybody who came to the class, who's watching online, who takes time out of their day. I really hope you guys learned something from it. And I appreciate FBC having me, asking me to do the class. And so today we do have homework. It is a survey. I did a course survey. It helps us to determine A, should we even offer the class again? B, what needs to improve and what's good and what's not. And I'd ask you guys, please be critical. You will not hurt my feelings. I just compile the data and pass it on to the pastoral team and they review it. So it's attempting to be 100% anonymous, but if you're online, you have to probably email it to me. If you don't feel comfortable, let me know and you can send your review directly to one of the pastors. But I just compile it all and then send out a report to them. So again, be very critical. You won't hurt my feelings, I promise. I just want to make it a better program for you guys and not a waste of your time. So again, thank you guys. Do we have any questions from the audience tonight or online? I'll wait for online just in case. And please say hi online if you chimed in, and that way we can grab your attendance. But any questions from the audience? Okay, well, thank you guys. Have a good night.